Welcome back. I am recording this on the 5th. I think today is the 5th. So that means this whole thing is officially out. This is launch day. That's exciting. By the time you're hearing this episode, it's been out for a couple weeks. But for me, in the current moment, this is exciting. And I just want to thank everybody, first of all, who's been listening so far and supporting the podcast. I'm feeling pretty stoked about it. It's kind of surreal that it's like available. I saw it on Apple this morning and like listened to it in my car, and I was just feeling all the things. So I'm also realizing in this moment we did not put my cat away before recording, so she is for sure going to be in this video. Hopefully she doesn't mess with any audio cords is the bigger concern here. But I am super excited to be doing this, super excited to be here and be dodging my cat for this episode. You know, we made it strong so far where she's not involved. So of course this is going to happen. Caleb's new role is now not only producing, but cat sitting. So great for us. But the last episode was pretty intense. It was a pretty chaotic story. And I originally kind of ended that saying that I didn't plan to go like really into detail about the intricacies of the relationship, but I have been having some conversations with people, and a lot of my TikTok content surrounding this topic is often asking a lot of these questions as well about narcissism and gaslighting and all of that stuff. So I kind of wanted today to actually be a little bit more serious. There'll definitely still be some interesting tidbits here, but I want to kind of dive into what that looked like for me and a little bit more of the literal breakdown of these terms, because I do think right now it's really trendy to talk about narcissists and gaslighting and love bombing, and we just like throw those terms around. Like, someone's nice to you, they're automatically love bombing you. Someone's a dick, they're automatically a narcissist. Someone was mean to you, they're automatically gaslighting you, right? And so that's not really it's not really accurate, and it's also not really fair and validating to those who have experienced this type of actual abuse. So I wanted to kind of break some things down. I wanted to kind of discuss what that looked like for me specifically. So I want to kind of walk you through, like I said, these experiences. I have some screenshots I just like pulled up from literally Google to kind of talk about this too. And I want to just first preface this by saying anything I discuss regarding like narcissism, gaslighting, any of that is just based on my own experience and just based on what I'm about to read you from Google. I'm not a psychologist. Again, this is not an educational podcast. So I can't say that I'm like incredibly versed in this subject, but I have been through a lot of information about it in my own research since learning this and with my therapist as well. So I kind of just want to break it down because, again, I think it's really important for women or men or really anyone to be able to identify these type of things in a relationship, and also to realize that this can take place in other types of relationships. You might have a boss like this, you might have a family member like this, and you might have a friend like this, and any of these things can be very toxic and draining to your mental health and to your well-being. So I am trying to just like help spread that awareness essentially by kind of breaking down what that looked like for me. So first of all, something that I found from PsychAlive is basically like common traits in a narcissistic relationship. Like, the partner is likely to have a sense of entitlement or superiority, lack of empathy, manipulative or controlling behavior, a strong need for admiration, focus on getting one's own needs met, often ignoring the needs of others, higher levels of aggression, difficulty taking feedback about their behavior. And it does say to take note that the degree that these traits manifest themselves will vary largely depending on the individual. And that is not funny, but I have my cat, if you're listening right now, instead of watching, my cat just like jumped into the frame right now. So this is just real how professional we are. But I kind of want to break down a few other things about this too, because again, a lot of common terminology that has been used with narcissism is love bombing and gaslighting. And again, I think that those things are really buzzwordy right now. And if you recall, from the previous episode, the story that I kind of broke down was really ironing out a lot of what that like love bombing phase can look like. And so with a narcissist, this tends to look very specific too. And I also want to highlight that in each of these things, they're capable of being mutually exclusive and also not exclusive. My cat is going to be an issue today. I'm so sorry. Like, this is not okay. So basically, you're able to be gaslighting someone even if you're not a narcissist. You can love bomb someone without being a narcissist and vice versa, but they do often go together. So I just want to be aware that like not everyone who loves bombs you is a narcissist. Not everyone who gaslights you is a narcissist, but if you have a narcissist in your life, it's very possible they were doing one or both of those things. So talking about love bombing. Psychology Today talks about this, and they basically say that love bombing feels glorious while you're in it. The attention and affection seems to like answer like your prayers, so to speak. You really have this sense of feeling like you found like the right person. It feels very euphoric to you. It feels very exciting. It feels like a soulmate, and you have no idea you've actually just been like targeted. And the bomber like will typically abruptly change colors and lose interest. This kind of brings that dream and that alternate reality of fantasy that you've created crashing down. So you can kind of already look back at the last episode and see where we had this like shattering of that via coming back from the trip, right? That rejection feels extremely excruciating if you're on the other end of it. It is a traumatic shock to your heart. You feel very betrayed, you feel abandoned, you feel duped, and you're confused trying to make sense of this nightmare essentially that was once a dream, and what you thought was real actually feels a lot like a mirage, and you find yourself searching for answers. You find yourself doubting and blaming yourself, and you're often losing trust not only in the opposite sex but in yourself too. Sometimes this can take place in the form of like ghosting by the person. Sometimes they dump you over like text or email or a phone call. It's usually not something in person, which we will get to that with my ending of my situation as well. But also just in the last episode, we talked about, right, like right before, up until we got back together, it was just a phone call. If you are with someone in person, you are usually bewildered by the coldness of this narcissist, who was just recently expressing love and promising an amazing future. So again, call back to last episode, we talked about this person was literally just, asking me to be in a relationship with them a week and a half prior to this, to when I got on this phone call after we had an argument, and they were just like a totally different person and shut down and basically trying to like ditch out of the relationship. Right. So these are all things that can be parallel to the story. But you may discover that you've been disposed of for a new prospect. You may have been cheated on, or you may have been being two-timed all along. It's very devastating. It can be hard to let go because all of their memories with this person are happy and wonderful because it's during that bombing stage, right? So it takes time to kind of process who this person really is. And the denial is basically what's protecting you from that painful truth that this relationship actually wasn't what you imagined. A lot of this happens according to Psych Today too, and something that I've uncovered a lot in discussions with my therapist, because love bombers and narcissists in general, they typically have actually a low self-esteem, even though they have this facade of confidence and independence. Narcissists actually feel very insecure and very empty. They require constant reassurance or some type of narcissistic supply, is what they call it, from people around them. And it's basically metaphorical to like, or analogical, I guess would be a better word, to vampires. It's just never enough to fill like that emptiness or satisfy that hunger for them. And rather than actually being confident, they fear that they are undesirable. And that sense of self is determined by what other people think of them. They try to control what others think to feel better about themselves. And so they use that love bombing tactic to basically boost their ego, seek attention, and fulfill a self-enhancement need for whether it's sex or power or control. When they are depressed or suffering loss or going through something hard in their own life, or they've become less enchanted with their last person, that's when they start looking for that new supply. And they're usually using things like seduction or game playing or relationships for that self-enhancement. Dating with them is very intense and moves very quickly. This also outlines how the last episode went down. The attention can feel very dizzying and exciting to whoever's receiving it. And there's frequently excessive communication at first, reflecting the bomber's neediness for affirmation. It's usually over text or social media, and they can exercise more control that way at a distance. So this is like for them, just part of how they pull you in. And it's also really important to outline this stage, I think, because this is the big piece of why when everyone always asks the question, like when you're seeing these flags or when someone starts mistreating you or acting a certain way, like why you have such a hard time coming out of it, that stage is a big piece of that, because they basically have shown you this version of themselves that you take to be true and you take to be the person that you know. And so then whenever they kind of switch up on you, you're very confused by that, and you are still convinced that this is just like a minor flaw because you've seen all these grandiose things. Like they've made you feel a way you've never felt before. They've told you you're making them feel a way they've never felt before. Like you think that you have this like deep soul connection, and then that this person is just like going through something, or this is just a momentary lapse. And this type of belief is only further driven in by typically gaslighting. So that's like the next thing I kind of wanted to dive into, is that the definition of that is that it's essentially a form of emotional abuse that involves intentionally manipulating or distorting the truth to instill self-doubt in someone else. So this is typically a form of narcissistic abuse, but again, someone can gaslight you without being a narcissist. These things are not always correlated, but it involves tactics that make the other person question their sanity and doubt their perception of reality. So the end goal of this is for the narcissist in this scenario to gain control over a person's thoughts, feelings, and actions. And it is typically used to protect their ego, to keep others from challenging them, or to maintain a sense of superiority over others. Like I said, relationships with narcissists typically go through different stages. Typically, that first honeymoon stage, otherwise known as a love bombing, which is set up to get you to trust them before slowly starting to devalue that person through toxic and abusive behavior. And this typically begins at that point after that love bombing and other tactics have gained your trust. So I wanted to have that nice little serious educational session. It's kind of a backdrop to what this looked like. So already, if you listen to that and you went back to the last episode, there's a lot of parallels there. And what had happened essentially when I got into this relationship where we left off, where he came back, he apologized, is that we basically went through just cycles of this same pattern over and over again in our relationship. So we went back into this and it was just like fucking euphoric again. Like it was, he came back, he apologized, he was doing all the things. He was like buying me all kinds of things, taking me on all these dates again. We were like, it was like a whirlwind summer romance. This was back in 2017 now. And we are talking about Goodwill again. Like I said, same day, same guy. But I remember it was just like, he was self-employed. I was working retail. And anytime I had a day off, it's like, we never just like would do chill things. Like, okay, yeah, at the end of stuff, it's like we would go and like, like watch movies or go to dinners, but it was like spontaneous trip 4 hours away to a theme park. Like, let's go to this waterfall an hour away. Let's go to this big, like extravagant date plan. Let's go kayaking today. Like super fun. Nothing wrong with doing all those things, but it was just adding to part of that, like, life with me is like this. Life with me is exciting. Like it was this whirlwind of, you're not having an ordinary experience and this person is going to be treating you like this for a really long time. And I do know that in most relationships there's like this honeymoon period, and when you're always like doing a lot of stuff at the beginning. But what had started happening is, as we got further and further through the relationship, that first like several months was like that with very little issues. Like we had already had a little bit of like the backdrop of the issue with Amsterdam, right? The girl from the South America trip. So that was already something that was like in the backdrop of this that would occasionally come up. And there would be things where I would feel like, nervous to open back up or anxious about that. And I was always being like heard. And at the time I was already starting to get these little droplets of gaslighting. And I want to make it clear too, during the relationship, I had no idea this is what was happening. So this has all been in hindsight, and through therapy. But I was basically being told over time that anytime this got brought back up, where I would just have like more questions about it, or I would be like, I struggle to trust you because of this. And that would turn into like, well, we weren't dating and you agreed to be here. We're in a new relationship now. We have to just like forget about that. Like you have to let this insecurity go. This is something that you need to work on in yourself. Like this is your own jealousy. If you can't make peace with this, etc. Because long story short, this girl was like still his Facebook contact, and she would like intentionally, because let's be honest, ladies, we know how this works. She would be like intentionally liking like photos of us all the time and things like that, and it would upset me. It was really triggering to me, to the situation. And rather than like confront her or like do anything about it, he was usually speaking to me about how that's something I needed to work through and like something I needed to get a grip on as far as like my insecurity and my jealousy. So there was already that little underlying piece sometimes, even while things were great. In mentioning again about how the speed of things are, at this point, towards the end of the summer, we have been together for 3 months in like an official committed relationship, but we have been seeing each other, known each other for about 6 months, right? Either way. I had just recently moved in with a roommate, and he was in like a not great living situation with a family member and was trying to get out of it actively. And I was getting ready for my first day of teaching. For those of you who don't know, I used to teach college English. Fun times. But I was going to bed one night, and my roommate was followed into our apartment by a man with a gun. And we were basically being robbed. There was a man in our apartment. We were like put into lockdown. Long story short with that, it's like a crazy story that I'll maybe elaborate on another day. But we were safe. Thankfully, we didn't lose a lot of stuff, but we were robbed at gunpoint, and it was very scary. And it basically made us afraid to be living in that same place. We like wanted to get out of our lease and things like that because they did not catch the guy. And they wanted to, we wanted to feel more safe. And so Goodwill was already looking for a place to live as well. And, he kind of proposed to me that he was like, what if we all just live together, since you're afraid to be by yourself? Like he was already basically part-time. Like he had basically moved into my bedroom for the next month because we were afraid to be there. And we all started looking at a house together. So our foundation for moving in together was already like not pre-planned. It was not because like we were at this stage of where we were like so in love, we were like ready to do that. We were already saying I love you and stuff to each other, but that happened like instantly when we got back together again. And it was not like a natural progression. Like I said, our relationship had only been quote unquote stable for 3 months, and we felt like we were like rationalizing it because we're like, oh, we're gonna have a roommate. It's not like we're like doing it by ourselves. And I remember that like we thought we were doing all these things that were super healthy, but we moved in there and he was like, we can like sleep together every night, but we should have like separate bedrooms and all of this stuff to like basically like not rush it, which like maybe that is a healthy approach. I just, it's really hard to look back on really anything that he set up as something that wasn't like weird. But we basically like were really trying to like convince ourselves this was like a good next step, and it felt right in the moment because we were so scared. And I definitely was like excited about it. I was excited to be living with a partner. Like I said, I was like 26, and I felt like I was finally like getting all these things that I had watched people that I had grown up with that they were already having, right? Like I was quote unquote behind on relationships compared to like the area I grew up and stuff like that. So to be like moving in with my boyfriend and everything, I was super excited about it, having a roommate or not. And starting to live together was, I think, really something that heightened the inability for him to be able to manage what was going on with me as much. So by that I mean he could keep himself at a distance to like keep showing me the parts of him that he wanted to be seen versus not be seen, more than once we were living in the same household. So once we were living together, again, things kind of continued on this like up and down. And like I said, I want to kind of just highlight a few things, because as you hear some examples of how I was like gaslighted and things like that, I want it to be very understood why I wasn't seeing that. Because on the flip side, there was always something else. Like it was, I was getting like elaborate surprises planned for my birthday and like this huge like surprise trip and thing that he organized and all of this stuff. But then for weeks leading up to that, what I had been told is how much he hates like the pressure of gifts and how much he hates holidays and how much he doesn't really want to do anything for this celebration and to where I'm basically convinced like we're not going to do anything. And then we get to the day where it's there. And when I'm like, seem surprised and like so grateful, he's like, oh, you just expected me to not do anything. I see. And I'm like, you have literally been telling me for weeks that you don't want to do anything. He did the same thing with Christmas. We do the same thing with every holiday. It would be like, oh, I didn't get you anything. I'm not getting you any gifts. Like, Gifts make me uncomfortable, blah, blah, blah. Because he didn't like to receive them. And he would be like, I don't really think that that's how we should do things, blah, blah, blah. And I would like accept that and then be upset about it. And it was just like this weird cycle that we were in where there was like this give and take thing all the time. And like I said, I want to preface by saying that like this whole experience, the parts that were good did a lot of good for me. And that's what's made looking back on it so complicated. And that's also what I think makes it so difficult for people who have been through this to like move forward, because it really does distort your reality. Because on one hand, I'm over here and looking at all the ways that this played into like trust issues that I have now and ways that I feel about myself and how I like internalize so many things and I have so much anger towards this person. And then on the other hand, there's a lot of things in my life and about my personality now that I wouldn't have if it wasn't for him too. And that's kind of their entire play is they want you to be constantly conflicted. So like, for example, in our first year of dating, I was really unhappy with what I was doing. I didn't want to work retail as my job, right? Like I was doing that as a means to be in Nashville. And I was in love with working out. And I mentioned in the last episode that this would come full circle, that he was like super fascinated by that. And I remember him even trying to like go to the gym with me when I first started. Like he'd be like, oh, I want to spend time with you there. I want to see what you love. And I love doing this with you and sharing it. And he, supported that. And I had mentioned that I wished I could just, do something I loved for a living and how I was feeling kind of lost after giving up the music career. And he basically was like, what if you could just get paid to work out? And I was like, that would be amazing, obviously. But, I can't really do that. And he's like, why not? Why can't you just get like certified and do personal training? And I was like, well, I'm working at Hard Rock Cafe, so I don't really have the money to get a certification, but that would be dope. And he loaned me the money. He was like, if you're really going to be able to do this, like, he's like, I believe in you. Like, you can totally start your own business. You can do your own thing. And he like funded it up front. He helped me. He designed my first logo for Kylie Uplifts that I used. Like we, really like championed that project together. He helped me like start taking clients like under the table. LOL, sorry, Planet Fitness, but like start bringing people in, and like he advertised for me. He started giving my business cards to clients of his from his business that he ran. Like he was really like championing for me in this, and was a huge part of me deciding to do that. Like him being self-employed himself, like I had a great like example, and he always painted it as like, if you do this, we can like travel together and we can live this like life together, and this is better for us and all these things. And I was super excited about that. Like I was like, we're painting this vision together. This is super dope. And the same thing happened when a few months into that, I was excited and starting to think about like wanting to be a competitor. And this is when I like had no business wanting to compete. I hadn't hired a coach yet. I had gained a lot of relationship weight in the first year from all these things we were doing all the time. And I remember telling him that I was like, I kind of have this crazy like goal that I want to do this. And he was like, you can do whatever you put your mind to. Like, absolutely. How can I help you? And I was like, I've been kind of looking at this one coach. Like, I'm thinking about hiring him. And he was like, do it, reach out, like set up the call. You'll never know. Like he pushed me to do that. I was like, you can absolutely, I'll support you in any way. And he did, like at the beginning of all that. So it's like, I got into all these things, and he helped me with as much as he could. He used to film all my content. He used to do all my photo shoots for me for the stuff. He would, edit videos for me. And, he really helped me. And he did that stuff throughout the entire relationship. But as things went on, as I became successful in all of these areas, he had a problem with it. And he would never say that that's the reason why, but looking back, that's like the parallel that I can draw. And something else that was kind of being talked about in this article that I got this information from was that it's not enough for a narcissist to just be liked or appreciated. And if I mentioned that in the last episode, something he often like mentioned to me was that, oh, we were both fucked up. We both came from fucked up backgrounds. But he also used to tell me how like inspired by me he was. He was like so impressed that I had like done the things I did, that I had a master's degree, that when he met me, I was like living on my own. And he was like, I love how like put together you are. I love that you're like so driven and things like that. And yeah, those are compliments we love to hear. But according to like psychology sites and things, it says that it only counts for a narcissist when a person who is valuing them has some kind of status or highly valued qualities, something like wealth or beauty or special talent or power or some kind of genius or celebrity, because narcissists like to idealize those prospective partners, and they essentially do that to augment their own lack of self-esteem. Like, the thinking of this is, if I can win over the admiration of this very insert adjective person, attractive, successful, whatever person, then I must be worthy. And part of the issue is that as that goes on, they start to have resentment for that. And if you start to fall short at all, or they start to like lose this enchantment, or they start to feel like you are better than them, that's triggering to them. And then it starts to feed into that insecurity that they have. So that's the only like parallel I can really draw as we went through the relationship and it suddenly became an issue. Like, you could definitely look at, like, I understand the strains that like being a business owner and being a bodybuilder has on a relationship, but I was just like constantly both supported and guilted for those things. Like, I was constantly like berated for, not being able to do certain type of date nights and things like that. And then on the other hand, like encouraged. And I was also told, like, the first year of a business is hard. Like, it's a grind. Like, he would often tell me how, like, he had to work so hard his first year and take like no time off just to like build a financial security. But then after that, it was worth it and all of those things. Right. But then when I was doing those things in the grind, it was like, you are always occupied by this. You care about this so much, blah, blah, blah. And this is also like, while I was in the building years of my business, we didn't really have this argument as much. The bodybuilding thing kind of was a tension, but throughout that time, nothing was really causing bigger issues around that. But what was always happening is there was this sense of him constantly making me feel like I was needy and that I was insecure and that I wanted too much. And I really latched onto that. So this is where that like gaslighting kind of comes into play. I really started to feel like this was true. And some examples of this for me would be like, if I would go out of town or something and come back and say, I missed you while I was gone, he would like just like not say it back. And I, would kind of be like, did you miss me? And he would be like, oh yeah, I mean, like things like, oh well, you weren't gone that long, or like I was really busy, I didn't really notice. And like, fine, sure. But when I would, eventually this had happened so many times that I would say things, because this would also happen in the context of sometimes I would be like, I love you. And he would just be like, that's nice. And I was like, okay. And so like, I eventually, when this would happen multiple times in a row, I would be like, hey, it's kind of upsetting to me or like hurts my feelings when I say these things to you and it's not reciprocated. It doesn't make me feel very good. And what I was responded to with was that I basically have insecurities that I need to work through if I am only saying that to get a reaction. Like, he was like, are you only telling me you love me because you want to hear it back? That's fucked up. And I was like, well, that's not why I'm doing it, but it does, it is nice to hear that back from your partner. Right. Like, so it was always this like thing about how I need to like uncover that, and how like I'm devaluing the meaning of love and like the weight of words by using them too often. And how like, if I'm only saying it with an expectation, like that's why it should be more meaningful if he like doesn't say it to me very often. And then when he does, it's actually, he means it. Like, he had this whole like way to explain it that I know when I recite it now sounds like so fucking stupid. But like, the way that he could present it and make it seem like I truly was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, you're right, I should work on that. And then it like conditioned me to believe that there was like this bigger value to whenever he did have like an emotional outpour, or like when he did do something nice, it was like this grandeur thing, because he basically was like conditioning me to wait for that. Like, it's super weird to reflect on, honestly. But it was kind of this constant like weird dynamic of that. And we got into about like a year and a half of dating, maybe 2 years or so. We'd been living together for like a year. And I remember this is the first time there was like kind of a big blowout. Like, we had just been fighting a lot. And it was constantly always about that. He was like, you're too needy. I don't know why you want to spend so much time with me. Like, I don't understand like why you don't like have your own things. Like we need our own things, like blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Space is important in a relationship. He'd always tell me we needed to focus on being more independent and in a healthy dynamic. That's true. I agree with that. But we basically got around to the time that we were going to be re-signing our lease for going on the second time. And I had anxiety around it because I already had anxiety the first time, which is another flag. Like we weren't even really in a place where our relationship was rocky yet. And I remember thinking about how nervous I was as our lease date approached, even though we were in a relationship and living together, that I was like going to have the conversation with him. Are we re-signing? And I feel like if you're living with someone that you're dating, it's kind of just assumed if you're not breaking up that you would continue to re-sign that lease. But I remember I literally can remember that we were sitting at a cookout right when I had to ask this, like, because it's like that vivid. I can remember how scared I was to be like, so are we gonna like re-sign the lease? It's due soon. And him being like, well, I guess that's what we're supposed to do, right? And I was like, sure, yeah. So we would do that. And then I remember the next year, I already had that memory and things had been kind of heated and he'd been talking about, you know, this neediness and this dynamic. And I remember him telling me, like, I think we should get our own places. And I was like, so distraught by this. And again, there are tons of different relationship dynamics out there. I understand that, like, that might work for people. But to me, I was just like, I don't really feel like we can go backwards. Like, I was like, it's weird to me that we've been dating and living together for 2 years. And now you want to, like, not necessarily break up, but we don't want to live together. It's interesting because he was basically like, I don't know if I want to be in this relationship and things like that. And I was like, well, I don't really know why like this is happening. It felt very left field to me how he'd been behaving anyways. And he essentially, again, just brought it down to like, I had a lot of these internal issues that I needed to work through. I had family trauma that was affecting me. I had a lot of insecurities that needed to be addressed. And I needed to work on that in order for us to be better. Like I needed to love myself. I needed all of this. There was never any acknowledgement on his end other than him constantly talking about how being in like a traditional relationship and living in like this house in the suburbs was like so uncomfortable for him. But he would never even address that that's because his home life was so chaotic that this was like triggering for him too, because it was so unfamiliar. And there was never like things he needed to work on. And if there was, it was like this twisted, like, it's like hard to even explain, like the way that we would argue, honestly. Like, if you're watching me, I like look so flustered right now because it's like, it's still so difficult for me to work through, like, and understand what happened because it truly, like, I would only have these experiences based on what was given to me as the experience. Like, I would come with any problem or have this issue in the fight and be like, here's what's upsetting me. And by the time I left that fight, I was like apologizing for all of it. Like whatever thing I brought that he did or that he had upset me, it always turned into that, like, I was sorry. I had the takeaway thing to work on. And he would be like, I'm so glad that we can communicate about these things. Like, I'm so glad. And then we would immediately be like, we were always physically intimate right after any of these discussions. And then we would immediately be like really good for like a few days, a few weeks. And that was this continued cycle for us. And I remember after that decision, when we decided to like stay together, we decided to stay living together. I decided to start going to therapy because one, we love therapy. I'm very glad I made that decision. But I was prompted into it because he was telling me all these things I needed to go work on for our relationship. So I definitely went there trying to be like, I have to sort this out to save my relationship. He refused to go to therapy and he refused to go to therapy with me. So there's that as well. But I needed it. So I went. And I just remember, walking through all these things, and I've been seeing my same therapist now for 2.5 years. And over the rest of that relationship, this cycle just played itself out over and over again. And again, I had a lot of really high moments. We did a lot of really cool things. We traveled to a lot of really cool places. We took a trip to Thailand at the end of the same year. This was literally like 2 months after, by the way, when we almost didn't live together. We like went and stayed in Thailand for a month. So it was the same thing. It's like every time it almost actually, this is important to point out, it almost actually became an addictive cycle to where probably for both of us, like every time we had one of these like near blowouts, our next like few months after it was like so good. And that was, now I see part of that same, like I was basically being like put into the relationship every time. It's like we would essentially break up for like a day or two, whether we moved out or not. It was like, this is over, we're done. And then it would be that same process that I outlined in the last relationship. There would be the groveling, there would be the accepting. But in now, instead of him taking all the blame like he did that very first time to get me back, it was me internalizing all of that blame and me having all these things to work on moving forward. And then he was like so thrilled and happy with that reaction that we were just like in this good place for a few months. Like I said, we traveled the world, we did all these things. And again, those are all experiences that I'm really grateful for. And they really opened me up. I was a pretty uptight person, honestly, when I met him. And now I still have uptight tendencies, but I am much more laid back. I'm much more spontaneous. I do a lot more fun recreational things and traveling things that I didn't do before. And again, that's like what makes this so confusing is I attribute so much of that to him, but I also know that that doesn't excuse or validate the rest of it. And so this continued on the same way through the next year. We made it through the whole pandemic. I remember being shocked that that worked out, but this is when I really started focusing more heavily on bodybuilding and my business started really doing well. Kylie Uplifts started bringing in a lot of clientele. I started doing a lot better financially and I was a lot busier. I was grinding. I was working like 12 or 13-hour days every day. And now the conversation had switched. So it went from where the whole relationship so far, I've been constantly told and was in therapy for the fact that I was so needy. I was so not independent. I was insecure, all of this. And now I'm feeling super confident and secure in myself, like physically and my capabilities. And as like a bodybuilder, as a business owner, I'm succeeding. I'm doing really well. I have a lot of my own shit going on. I was traveling by myself for like business trips or like to meet my fitness friends. And sometimes he would come, sometimes he didn't. And I was like doing all this stuff and really felt like I had a life separate from him as well as with him, like what he had always told me he wanted. And now the argument was always, I didn't prioritize him. I took him for granted. I cared about bodybuilding and my job more than I cared about him or the relationship or anything else. And all of these things. And I, again, just found myself in this state of confusion. Like I was like, what fucking Goldilocks version of this relationship are you looking for? Like the soup was too hot, the soup was too cold. Like, where is the correct soup? Like, I don't know. And so I was just constantly confused and we would constantly fight about these things. I remember we like started going to some of these like virtual relationship meetings with my at the time she was a business coach of mine, but she was venturing into some relationship love coaching, Hannah Deindorfer. So shout out to her. She's been on a journey with me. We will be having her on this podcast, so that's exciting. But she was hosting some of these like relationship meetings and I got him to actually go to some of them with me during the pandemic. And I just remember like we had gone to a few of them and he like blew up on me one day and was just like, I don't want to be doing in these meetings. It makes me feel like something is fucked up with us. And if we need these meetings, like then we just shouldn't be together. And I'm like, okay, that's not how therapy works, but okay. We won't go anymore. Right. And so it was this constant thing. And we got to the end of 2020 and we had moved into a new place. We had moved out. We had been living by ourselves. Our other roommate had moved out like a year prior. So we had already been living alone together for like a year. But we wanted to move into like a cheaper home. And we had done all this and like he had done all these things for my birthday. Like again, just the same pattern, like had helped me throw a party. He like had surprised me at the new place and like done up a whole office for me for Kylie Uplifts, like painted my logo on the wall, like did all this really great stuff for me. And I was so appreciative. I was so excited about it. And then 2 weeks later, just has this like discussion with me when he's like super in a bad mood. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, why are you so unhappy? And he's just like tells me how deeply unhappy he is with his whole life, including our relationship, and that he like doesn't want to do it anymore. Once again, we're in this same cycle. And I'm like, he's telling me that, you know, I'm super ungrateful. And like, I had been working through our whole moving process, which like he did take on a ton of the move himself because of that. But it's like, you can't extend yourself an offer and do the things and then be upset with people when you're doing them. Like, and that's kind of like the constant thing is he would do all this stuff for me and then like be mad at me that he did it. Like it was so weird. And so we get to this point and we like almost break up again. And I remember I take a trip to Austin actually, which is like so full circle to me that I ended up here and living here now. Cause I remember I came and I visited my dear friend Jasmine, who I now live with. And I sat with her. We sat out on this beautiful spot watching the sunset and we both just like were crying about our own perspective life issues. And I was like, I now have had to beg this man to be with me 3 different times. Like, I was like, I am in this cycle and it's not healthy. And like, I am worth more than that. And this is not okay. And I was like, I'm going to come back and I'm going to try this last time. And if I come to this place again, I was like, I'm not doing this again. And I went back and I really just focused on me. I really went all in on bodybuilding stuff. I went all in on my business even further and started seeing a ton of success in both of those realms. And things with him kind of just like leveled out. I felt like maybe I was giving him what I wanted in that sense, but I also was just like detaching myself because I was so worn out from the way that this had made me feel. I was so tired of this constant back and forth that we basically spent the next 6 months kind of just like existing as like roommates who had sex. Like it was like very mundane, and he would often bring that up. We would do things to try to fix that. We would do things to try to like be excited or like have new stuff going on, and it was just like not working. And we got to March of last year, and I remember we had a conversation, and I was just like, one day when we were getting ready to go out, I was like, we shouldn't, like, we're not good right now, are we? And he was like, no. And it was honestly the most peaceful thing. And it's where I don't know if he just realized there was no longer like a sense of control to have in the situation because I had tapped out or what was happening. But I just remember now in the whole scheme of things, this being the most confusing part of it. But the way that it unfolded after makes more sense. So it was very amicable. We like both just were like, yeah, this is done. Like we have a lot of love for each other, but like this is not working and we should not do this anymore. And so we decided to part ways. I was going to move out. He helped me with that. Like I found a place on my own, but he helped move me into it. He like bought me all the new sets of like tools and stuff that I would need, like literally moved my shit into it, built me a new vanity for it. Like all of these things, like, right. And we were like, we're always going to be in each other's lives. Like this isn't like a separation or whatever. It's just, we honestly left it on the table too, of like, we both had shit that we needed to work out. He finally, for the first time, was telling me that he knew that he needed to like work on himself and all this stuff. And I was like optimistic. I was like, wow, if we really both like dealt with these issues that we allegedly have, we can be in a better place, but like we need time first. Right. So I was like so focused also. Like I said, I was in the middle of a prep while this was happening, and things with Kylie uplifts were going like crazy at this exact time. And I had so many things to distract me, which I'm grateful for, but in hindsight, not super healthy coping. And I just like was like, I'm good. I'm focusing on these things. I'm great. I look the best I've ever looked. I'm most successful I've ever been. I'm totally fine to be single right now. Like this is great. So I like went off on it, and him and I not talking to each other lasted for a good like 3 weeks. So we had a lot of things to like break ties on, right? Because we had lived together so long that we were still like getting mail and like trying to sort all that stuff out. And like I said, things were like peaceful with us. I let him keep one of our 2 cats. And when I say let him, it's because they were both mine. I paid for everything. And so I let him keep the one. Like we were like, I was like, we have visiting rights. We're still going to see them. Like it was like a very amicable split, as the celebrities say. And I was like, having a hard time grieving it, but I knew that I was like in a space to move forward. And I don't know if that bothered him or triggered back into these behavior cycles or what happened, but it's like I showed up one day for a piece of mail, and he like asked me to come in and talk, and he was just like distraught, and he was like, I still think we made the right choice, but I'm like heartbroken and I don't really have any friends to confide in about this and like talk to, so I like want to talk to you about it, but you're the person I'm sad about. This is confusing. And I was like, yeah, I get it. And we ended up like talking about everything. And then like, of course we started sleeping together again. So that's like rule number one, like just don't fuck your ex. Like that's really, I could end the podcast here. Like that's like where this all goes wrong. So, we fell back into this cycle where we were like kind of doing that, and we were spending time together again, and we like kind of kept it distant for a little bit, but he started like showing up and doing things. Like he did a photo shoot for me and my coach, and we were spending time together again, and started to like go on dates again. And we were kind of talking about that. We're like, what if we just approach this like we're dating again? Like we're going to start over. We're going to like, we're just going to try to have a fresh slate and be these people we've always wanted to be, and to be the people we're capable of being. And he was basically like gassing me back up into the same cycle. Like if I look back, the parallels of like the story I told last week of how we met is so similar to how these next few months played out. It was like the same thing. There was about 6 weeks of like, things were really intense with us again. He was like, I'm always going to be in love with you. I'm never connected with anyone like you. Like, we've never been able to find a sexual connection like this with anyone else. Like, all of these things. And then all of a sudden, like, I'm 2 weeks out from my show, and he was like, yeah, I'm feeling really confused, and I think we should stop sleeping together because it's making it confusing. And I was like, okay. So at this point, I am like, basically, I'm way back into this relationship. I'm like, me 6 weeks ago, I was like, ready to be single. I got this. And now I'm suddenly like all tied up into the fact that this is supposed to work out with him and that we made this huge mistake. And so I'm like, okay, we like pull back. He like comes to my bodybuilding show and everything still. And we decide like, hey, we're still going to be in each other's lives. But he's like, I need to still take this like sex break and like work out my feelings. Like, let's just not do that. So we spend the entire month of June not sleeping together, but he's going out with me and my friends every single weekend. We're getting drunk and like making out at bars and like spending time together and talking all the time, but we're just like not sleeping together. I'm still super invested. We get to the end of the month and I get some pretty interesting like family news that triggers me a little bit, and he's the person I call about it, and he offers me to like come over and soothe me and talk to me about all these things, and we start sleeping together again. So we're back in this whole cycle, and we go through July and August like this. Once again, we're just like basically dating. We're spending all our time together again now. We are basically back and forth at each other's houses all the time. I'm spending a ton of time at the house we used to live in together because that's where he still was. Like, we're basically fully back in it. And I'm not really ready in this episode to go into like the depths of the big traumatic incident, but we like had a big trauma between us come up and something that we had to work through together. And it was really, really hard. And he was really, really there for me. And it would definitely put a big strain on us. And going through that and then coming out of it, I was feeling super nervous because basically over and over again, he still was like, I'm not ready to commit. I can't be in this relationship, but like, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to stop doing this. So we were like in this constant back and forth, very similar to the way it was when I first met him. And we're in this dynamic. And I one day was like feeling super insecure about this girl that he had been talking to as a friend. And he had like been super transparent with me about her, told me they were friends, told me about her. Again, the parallel with Amsterdam is not missed by anyone, especially me. And, you know, he's like, I'm like, well, if he's sharing so much information about her, it can't be that weird, blah, blah, blah. But we're hanging out. I remember I got back from a Vegas trip with all my pals, and I was like feeling super insecure when she texted him. And I'll admit it. I went to a laptop, and because I asked him if I could use it for work, he has a Mac. I fucking opened his iMessages and I looked. So, and you know what? Once again, if you're finding shit, I don't think you're crazy. You were following your intuition. We should respect people's privacy, but I fucking had shit to find. So he had slept with this person. And so I was like asking about it. And once again, I'm just triggered right back to the same thing. He's like, yeah, that happened. We weren't dating. Like, to me, saying it out loud, I'm like, so bizarre because I'm like, I basically could just replay the last episode and it's what happened all over again. And he was like, we weren't dating. It's like, you know, it wasn't while we were even like involved, which I'm like, there was like a period of 4 weeks at most that we weren't involved, and they weren't even consecutive, but sure, go on. And so, you know, spoiled this whole thing. And I was just like, you know, I get it. I actually had handled it very well and was like, again, accepting his logic and rationale for it, and was like, you're right. I shouldn't be crazy about this. I'm sorry for invading your privacy. You can do whatever you want. But I think this begs the question of like, what are we doing? Will we be exclusive? When? What are we going to do? Etc. And basically, he was still not giving me that. And I just went into a frenzy. Like, he was like telling me that I'm hard to love. I make it difficult to be in a relationship with because he wants to love me so badly and I just won't let him. I have all these things I still need to work on before we can make it work. Like, this has shown him how much I still am super insecure and how many issues I still have. And all of these things, once again, we're just in the same cycle. And how, you know, he's like, I've been, you know, trying for so many years and I just like can't get through to you. And I'm like, okay, so maybe this is it. Maybe we'll never be in an exclusive relationship. Can I do that? I literally remember I actually called producer Caleb. I can remember this in this week. I don't know if he even remembers this, but I literally called him and I was like, so like, I might not be able to be in an exclusive relationship anymore. What do I do? And like, I'm getting all this advice. Like, and the reality of it is like, I was constantly compromising my own needs. Like, I am a monogamous bitch. It just is who I am, and that is fine. But I was literally telling myself like that. I was like, maybe I can do this if that's what he needs. Like, is that the issue? He won't commit to me. Like, maybe that's what it is. The same way that I told myself through our whole relationship that I was fine with the fact that he doesn't believe in marriage. I was like, I don't need marriage. We're fine. I fucking want to get married. Like I do. And so I like just once again was compromising myself to try to fit this and like make it work. And that's on me. That's ownership that I take. But it's also just part of this whole cycle. And so I am reeling about this for like a week, and I finally decide that I'm like taking it into my own hands and I'm going to be single and just like explore. And so I like got on a dating app and I start messaging with some people, and I was like, I'm not going to message him first anymore. We're going to like just play this cool girl game, whatever. And mind you, this is somebody that I had just been in a relationship for the last 4.5 years. Like, why the fuck are we playing this game? But I was. And so I remember he hit me up to like get dinner, and I was like, sick, let's do that. This worked. The universe is rewarding me for being cool. And we hung out, and I basically was transparent with him in the same way. I was like, okay, you gave me all these parameters, how I need to be independent, da 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 da. I'm on dating apps. I did this, like da 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 da. And he was like, I'm so proud of you. You're so like this is so great. Like you're really doing this work, like blah blah blah. And like we're gonna be better together foundationally if we like can be good individually. I really think we can work this out, like blah blah blah. We spend the whole evening together. Tells me how he's so in love with me. We can definitely make it through all these things. We just have to keep working in the directions that we are, and we'll definitely end up back together. We like obviously are intimate, like all this whole thing. And he's just giving me all this affirmation. Like we're talking through everything. We're like planning out like a potential cruise to go on in fucking 6 months. Like, so I'm like, great, we're on the right path. And the next day I decide to make plans with him to go to this movie thing. And because I'm feeling good, right? So he comes, we go, and somebody from the apps texts me while he's there. And because I had seen this girl that he had just slept with texted him, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna text him this guy back. And all it was like a, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm at a movie, and put my phone away. When I tell you, as like we leave this event, this man lost his goddamn mind, is literally like, who the fuck is texting you? Who's this guy? Da 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 da. And I'm like, guy from the apps. Because this is the same person who every time I've been like, did you fuck this girl? He's like, yeah. So I was like, a guy from the dating app. And he literally is like, this is the most disrespectful thing that anyone has ever done to me. Like, this is such bullshit. Like, you have given me so much shit about this stuff. And then like, now here you are, you're a fucking hypocrite. Like you're manipulative. Like this is all the things I'm being told. And that I just like disrespected him. Like he doesn't care what I do in my free time, but like to text someone back while we're on a date together. And I was like, oh, we're calling this dates now? That's news to me. Like, yesterday we weren't going to be in a relationship. Now I'm violating our relationship. Like I'm fucking flabbergasted that this is happening. And we get in this huge argument, and he basically like throws all this stuff at me again about how like I'm just so difficult. We go back and forth because I explode, and I'm just like, the whole reason I'm on these fucking apps is because you wanted to be single, you wanted me to explore, da 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 da. I wouldn't be doing any of this if you were just like committing to me, or like you wanted to be in a relationship. I quite literally would rather be talking to you than any of these people. And I have texts to my friends to prove that, right? So this turns into this huge fight. He ends up telling me I am manipulative, just like his mother, which has a lot to do with our entire situation, honestly. And I felt like that line is really important for a future fun story to come to the podcast. But yeah, so that was this big blow up that we had, long story short. And I could just like feel it in my core that this was like fucked. Like it was the end of the fight, and I was just like, I was distraught, but I also left this fight apologizing, truly feeling like all of this blame. Like I had said all these things to him, and after the end of the fight, I felt so shitty about myself and like so bad for having like sent that text to this man who I've never met and I had been talking to for 2 days, by the way. And I like beat myself up. We didn't talk for the next like 48 hours. And I was just distraught. I was on the phone with my mom. I was on the phone with all my friends. And I was like, I can't believe I fucked this up. Like I shouldn't have sent that text. I shouldn't have done this. Like just completely absolving all of it. And, you know, I had friends and stuff that were like, Kylie, he's being the hypocrite. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have done that like on a date, but like, this makes no sense given what he had just told you the day before. Like he was so happy for you for being on the apps like yesterday. And I was like, no, like I disrespected him. Like it was very fucked up. Like I was out of sorts about it. I went to therapy and like talked about it. And this is the first time my therapist was kind of like, look, if you feel like you did something wrong here, I get it. But she was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And I was like, yeah. So she helped me craft like a text because I like felt like I really needed to apologize. And so I crafted this apology text and basically was like, I understand if you need more space, but like I own that I fucked up. Like, I'm so sorry for making you feel the way that I did. Like, me apologizing. And I try to send it and it doesn't go through to his phone. And I quite literally don't think anything of this because my phone had already been like geeking out for a couple weeks, but I was just like, yeah, why would I think anything of that? Right. And I was just like, that's weird. So I get on Facebook Messenger and send the message there instead. And I'm like, hey, sorry if you get this message twice. My phone like was making it seem like it wasn't sending. And I just wanted to be sure. Take your time. And this man, who again, mind you, I have been with now at this point going on 5 years. And he says, your message did not go through because I blocked your number. Okay. Like, we did not break up in this fight, by the way, like to my knowledge. And so I was like, what? Like, and he was like, basically told me that the other night in our argument is the most disrespected he's ever felt in his entire life, top 5. And that he was not only upset by my actions, but by my excuses and rationale for said actions. And that any part he has played in this whole process has not been considered. And I need to like basically I like wasn't ever considering his feelings or his part in this and blah blah blah. And that he appreciates my apology. Basically his like skin tingles with anger every time he sees that I send him a message. And that was, other than a few things in the last few months that will come to light on this podcast, that's the last time I heard from this man. Like, he just stopped answering. I responded and I was like, so I guess we're done. Like, this, considering you blocked me. And I was groveling though still. I was back in this same cycle that I said I would never fucking be in again, that I promised the year prior to Jasmine that I would never do again. I was doing it. I was distraught. I was so apologetic. And I spent the next month and a half in one of the worst like lows I've ever been in. This is why I'm such a big advocate for mental health. And I already have a background of like, I have an anxiety disorder with mild bouts of depression. That's like my diagnosis. I don't have a depression diagnosis, but I have bouts of it. And I have a high functioning anxiety disorder. So I already have these underlying things. And I didn't know that I had also been dealing with this like emotional manipulation and abuse for all this time that was making that sense of self-worth and anxiety way worse. I basically had constantly lived in a flight or fight nervous system. And I didn't know all of this at the time, but I just, it all came crumbling down. I felt the lowest I'd ever felt. Like, he was supposed to, like, I was hosting my first Kylie Uplifts event the week after this blowout. Like, he was supposed to film it. He was supposed to do editing, all this stuff, like was just going to block me and not tell me, not do it, not say anything. Like, and I was just like so crushed, especially because once I like feel comfortable opening up on this podcast about like what we had just went through a few weeks prior to this, like the sense of like abandonment and just like betrayal and complete shock that I felt is indescribable. And I was just not okay. Like, I was very not okay. My friends came to visit me for my event, and I remember Caleb and Kara being like, why do you have any food? Like, and I was like, oh, I'm not eating. Like, who needs food? Like, I was like, you guys need snacks? I have almonds. Like, this is a vivid memory I have. And I was just like, sorry about that. But like, I was not well. And I really struggled with the fact that I blamed myself. And, all my friends were telling me that was so crazy, but like, I could not shake it to my core. This was like my fault. He was the best partner I was ever going to have. It's like everything that we had been through that was difficult that I outlined through this was like, I couldn't even think of it. All I could think of was like all of these highs and all of the ways that he was there for me and all the things he did for me and all the things he gave me. And I was so fixated on that up until I basically went to the retreat that was hosted by Hannah Deindorfer. And we had this crazy experience, which I'll get into more once she's on the episode. We'll save that and talk about what that was like. But I shared my story there, and it was the girls at the retreat that were like, this sounds a lot like narcissism. Like, you were being very gaslighted, first of all, just in that one instance of this, how this breakup conversation went, or like that fight that you guys had, like, gaslighted the fuck out of you. Like, and I was like, I'd never heard any of these terms before. This is before everything started blowing up, where people all are talking about it a lot. And I didn't know what any of that meant. And I was like, no, like, I was like, he's a good person. Like it's like, I was like, I fucked this up. Like, and it's just like, he has all this trauma and like, he's had this really rough upbringing. That's why he acts like this. And they're like, yeah, but he's not doing anything about it. And I started looking into all this, and I remember I got back and I went to therapy and I was like, hey, so something interesting happened to me. I was brought these terms up, and she's like, I don't know, you've been seeing me for 2.5 years now while you've been in this relationship, and I haven't sensed that. And she's like, I'm going to ask you a few questions and things. And I remember we got to the point in the conversation where I said, I was sharing some of the experiences and we were going back through the roadmap of the relationship. And she finally says to me, who usually apologized in your relationship? And I was like, I had to really think about it for a while. I said, finally, well, me, because I was usually overreacting. And she was like, I'm sorry, what? and I was like, yeah, like I was like, he didn't really say sorry very often. I mean, occasionally he was like sorry that I like felt a certain way, but he like ultimately was usually not in the wrong. I was just overreacting about something that I shouldn't have been overreacting about, or something that I was like too sensitive about. And I said this to her like dead serious. And she was like, oh no. I was like, what? And basically, what we uncovered, and my therapist straight up said to me that she was like, I don't know if I should, like, what I should do in this situation. If I should like take all my degrees off the wall because I've been seeing you for 2 years and I haven't seen this. But she was like, this is so bad that like the reason I didn't see this is because every experience you've come in here with is after the fact. Like, you've come into these appointments after you guys have had like whatever talk you've had about it, whatever fight like that you've had, and you're bringing in the version of reality and of the situation that he has left you with. Like, you had all these experiences distorted and manipulated and like turned around to where you were always bringing in like, here's this thing I need to work on and here's what happened through his lens. And she was like, even with this fight, which is the first time she's like, I started seeing it. Like, she had said to me that she was like, I do see the gaslighting in the way that this ended. And she was like, but like, even with that, you were so confident in like, here's the things that like happened and here's where this was and all of that. And she's like, I only have an experience of this man as what you have brought me. Like, I don't know him. I've never met him. And I had only brought her all of these experiences from this one perspective. And she was like, I have not seen this level of this in a very long time, if ever. And I was like, that is fantastic. So we spent months kind of uncovering and going back through, which was very difficult and very painful, but all of the things I had basically talked to her about in therapy for the last 2 years regarding the relationship, and unpacked them and looked at them with this like objective lens and like this new lens. And she is like, I can't diagnose someone that I haven't seen, but she was like, this checks all the boxes for NPD, and which is narcissistic personality disorder. And she was like, if not that, he's definitely BPD, which is borderline personality disorder. And she was like, you have been, regardless of what label you want to put it, a victim of emotional and mental abuse for most of your relationship. And she was like, that doesn't take away. And I want to leave you guys with this, especially if you're someone who's been through something like this. She's like, this doesn't take away from what you did experience in that relationship as good and real, because that has been one of the hardest things for me, is to feel like the last half a decade of my life was just like fake or like all these good things. And that's why I wanted to also outline, not only to see the contrast, but like I I don't know if I would have a business or not, or all of these things without him, but I also had to come to learn that like it's not because of him. Like, I and you, if you're in a situation, I still did all of that work for myself. I still had to put the things in action. I had to show up every day. I had to be the person. And it was fantastic to have someone who pushed and supported me to do those things. But a narcissist in your life can make you feel like they are responsible for everything good that you have. And so that way, when they leave, you feel like you have nothing and you feel like you are incapable without them. And that's where I was at. And my business admittedly took a fall during this time, and it's because I internalized and believed all of those things. I had a lot of stuff hormonally and stress going on, but like my physique took a fall during this time. Like, I believed all of those things that I had achieved, I couldn't do it without him. And that is literally what they are conditioning you to believe. And that is just not true, because everything that you've done in your life, you had to do it. And so I am always going to be grateful, and I'm always going to have this spot of appreciation for this lesson and this relationship in my life, because I did take a lot of leaps that I wouldn't have taken. And I am thankful for a lot of the qualities I have from this relationship, but you can get there ideally in your life without also having all of the emotional turmoil and abuse. So, um, that is like the most general recap I can give of that. And there's been so many other levels and layers to this. Like, we really did not contact each other at all up until like right before I moved to Austin. And that is a story that is going to be another time. Because as I teased in the last episode, my TikTok content about narcissistic abuse, um, did end the relationship with the person he started dating within a month after me. I actually found out that they started seeing each other within a week after this happened with me. But I found out about it a month later. And, again, I was heartbroken. But that's another reminder, ladies. It ain't always what it seems. If they seem like they moved on and they're fine, remember, if a guy moves on, or a girl, if you're a guy listening to this, that quickly and they had all these issues, they are just bringing that shit to whatever new relationship that they are in. So don't let yourself be put into a spiral about that either. Because what came to light is that this girl was having the exact same experience as me. And my TikToks helped her see that. And she helped me validate my whole experience as well. I want to tell that story. It's a very crazy story. I will tell that story. But I'm kind of waiting to see what she's comfortable with me sharing from that. So I need to talk about that with her. And also, I'm going to cross my fingers because I would fucking love to have her on here. So we'll see what happens with that. But I definitely have been very validated in those experiences, and that has been really helpful, because the scary part about this is up until that contact with her, I was pretty positive that I was right. But because I had been conditioned to this so long, that there's part of me that at night would lay up and just be like, did I make this out to be worse than it is because it helped me heal? Because let's be honest, moving on is easier when you hate someone. Moving on is easier when you're angry. Moving on is easier when you feel like the person is shitty. And if it was just something that you feel like you truly lost, that's really hard. And so I often wondered if I had like exaggerated or made the situation worse, or clung on to these like trendy narcissist and gaslighting terms because it gave me a way to cope. And I would sit there and basically gaslight myself. Like, I was like, are you maybe being crazy? Did you make this up? Did you extend the truth because you want to feel better and to heal? Because it did help me heal, to let go of the rose colored lenses. But hearing this experience from someone else and it being basically like a mirror image of mine, it was very validating to me that I'm not crazy. So I want you to know that if you've been through something like this and you're feeling that, you're probably not crazy and it probably was happening. And I just want to have this conversation be open, because it's something, like I said, I had no idea was even a thing. I didn't know it was happening to me until months later. And it's been a long, long journey to come out of that and to recover. I still have a lot of issues from it that I'm working through, but I am on the other side. It's been a year now. And so we are here, and thankfully it led me to this. Like, I wouldn't be doing this podcast if all this stuff hadn't happened, right? So I'm super excited about that. And over the last year, like I said, I've been exploring that recovery process, that healing process, that re-entry to dating. And there has been some tears, but also just a lot of like funny shit that's happened during that time. So we kind of had to get these heavier episodes out of the way to set the stage for like why I'm here, how I got here, and like what was going on in these antics to come. And now we can move forward with some of the comedy of it all. So if you stuck through these episodes, I know they were, like I said, long and pretty heavy, but I want this podcast to entertain, but also to help. So I hope that this reaches somebody and just makes them feel more seen in their experiences. Don't hesitate to reach out to my personal socials or the Responsibly Unhinged account. If you ever need to talk about any of these things or want to feel validated in your experience, I would love to hear from you. I would love to share. Eventually, I would love for this podcast to have some kind of like anonymous segment where I can like talk to you guys about this kind of stuff. That would be really cool. So please share. All the links to everything is always in the show notes. And if you are enjoying this so far, please leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple. If you're watching on YouTube, please comment, subscribe, like, all the fun things. Hopefully this week, if you watched on YouTube, I did a little bit better because last week's potential nipple slip situation had me just bugging out. So as you can see today, I was very like secure. So I tried not to be messing with like all my shit as much. But today on YouTube, you got lots of cat appearances. So, there's always just going to be something special. Last week it was nipples. This week's it's pussy. So we are here for you every week with something new. You're never going to know what's going to come. But that being said, we will end this on a happy note. I'm really excited to have this podcast out. I'm really excited to be sharing all this with you guys. And I'm excited to start getting into some of the funny shit.